Hello, hello, everybody. Welcome to another exciting episode of Revolution Gathering. Um, wow, so it was great week. I've become friends with Jason from Sleaford Mods and chatting. And a few months ago, he told me he was coming. They were coming to play here in Seattle and invited me to go to the show. And so my girlfriend who lives in Denver, I called her and said, we got to get you out here. You should come out. I got tickets. We're on the list for Sleaford Mods, and it'd be pretty cool. And so she came out for that, and it was great. I got to go backstage and finally meet Jason in person and Andrew in person and some of their road crew. And man, it was super, super cool. Really love those guys, and was not even disappointed a little bit. They're just super kind and wonderful folks. So that was really really cool to hang out with those guys and be on the have the backstage pass. Hey everybody, backstage. Yeah, so that was really cool. Got to sit down with Jason, have a little chat, and talk about some things in the world and what's going on, and it was pretty dang fantastic. I put pictures up on Instagram and Facebook if you're interested to see those. But yeah, so that was really great, and I got to spend some time with my girlfriend, and she finally got to meet my kids, and that was really cool. So yeah, very very cool. Good week. So yeah, there you go. It's always nice when she's in town because I don't spend as much time online or reading the comments or listening to podcasts. So there you go. So today I've had two thoughts. I had two thoughts about today's talk, and I think instead of being like, I'm going to choose one, I've chosen two because I think they work out well together. So I will try to make this a brief talk today. I know I'm running a little late, but I think it's worth a conversation, and I think it's worth the talk. And I think both are very important things that we need to talk about as fellow human beings. So, as you may have seen, the talk is called "A Failed Faith?" question mark. Another gospel. And we'll get to why I'm saying that. But I'm going to be sharing some of my usual suspects as far as biblical text, because one, I think it's vitally important. Two, I might be preaching to the choir, as they say, but this is stuff we have got to be more verbal about and talking about, and continue to think about how do we argue well, how do we disagree well, and have tough conversations. And I realize that there is a very big inability for people who have been longtime church goers, for these folks to have constructive conversations or to have pushback on things that they have held sacred for so long. And unfortunately, a very, really an ignorance of the Bible and the literature and the faith and the history of the faith. And I find it really concerning. I had an argument with someone yesterday, and they started it, but I had put up a post about pro-life, and it was like, you're not pro-life, you're pro-birth unless you believe in, kids having 3 meals a day and education and this thing, and I was really surprised. Like, I don't know why I'm still surprised, but by the pushback that so many Christians have, that so many people who claim to be Christians and followers of Christ had about being angry, that it's not that they were like, one, I had one guy just completely just sent me maybe 100 comments, like continued to argue for the death penalty and how he was pro-life. And then used Romans 13 and said, well, I have to, because and I'm going like, so then I asked him my usual question. I'm like, well, if, segregation was legal and everything Germany did was legal. I mean, like, so for the past 2,000 years, has that verse been every group of leadership and every country and every, which always shuts them down. And often you see these people's real reality. Then I got an argument with someone who was told me that they had a theology degree, and they were upset about being called out for. I mean, and that's the thing, is these people who read this and felt called out. It was just a statement. They came in and wanted to argue that, well, I shouldn't have to worry about the basic needs for somebody. I had one was, oh, how could you put the flesh on the spiritual? I mean, I'm like, do you not realize what the literal teachings, the basics message of the gospel is taking care of humans' needs? For some reason, these folks, they go to these churches and they get in these communities that have seemed to have forgotten the very basic messages of the gospel. And then they'll like say, well, no, our goal is to win people to Jesus, get people saved, and get them to heaven. And as we'll see, I mean, even the Apostle James says that's not how it works. Jesus makes it clear that that's not how it works. The Apostle Paul makes it very clear that that's not what it's all about. But we have created another gospel. We've created a law. And when I've talked about like being cruelty for Jesus and things like that, I honestly, I don't want to beat up on the church. Like, I don't want to be like, oh, the church is shit. I don't want to do that, but it's become so frustrating to see people with degrees who can't even have an argument and don't know biblical history, like simple biblical history. They don't know Christianity was nonviolent for the first 300 years. They don't know what hell means. They don't have done any in-depth studies. And they're saying, oh, I've got a degree in theology. And I'm like, I don't have a degree in anything, but I've studied theology. I've studied scholarship. I've studied history, and I know this stuff. And so it's very tough for me to see this type of ignorance and hate come out in such a forceful way. And then they'll be like, chapter and verse. And then I was like, context. I'm like, I'm giving you context, but his context could only live within those pages, not actually the context of when the different individual letters were written. So then I tried that, and then he's like, oh, that book means, but I'm going, okay, you keep moving the goalpost. And then obviously someone, not obviously, but then when they got really mad, they were like, oh, you're a thief, just like your parents, and blah, blah, blah. And this continues to happen. And this just wasn't one person. There was a few people. There was an older lady who was like, got to knock this shit out. Don't do this. Just stop it. Stop this stuff. It's like these folks are angry about the idea. Another guy goes like, I think you misspelled communism, thinking that people having 3 meals a day, parents making livable wages, people having a decent education is somehow communism. I mean, this is the place we're at. And this is Christians arguing for this type of thing. I had another guy be like, I can't follow a sissy Jesus. I mean, it's mind-boggling to me. And one of the reasons why I don't really want to be around Christians, because we have become so divided and we become so angry towards one another. And, and I understand the anger, but it's so divided, and I don't want to hang out with either side, because I don't want to sit within the scapegoating situation. But what we have is a situation of people who are truly ignorant, which means they don't understand, they haven't learned, they haven't taken the time to understand the Bible. And we have a lot of really bad teaching out there in the church, and people just going along with it. I mean, to give you the idea, look at the folks who support this administration and things like that, and say they're believers. It's absurd. So, I try to stay out of Galatians because I go to Galatians, the beginning of Galatians every year, but I had to go to Galatians today because this is exactly what we're dealing with. And it's Galatians 1:6, where the Apostle Paul says, I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you in grace of Christ and turning to a different gospel. Not that there is another gospel, but there are some of you who are confusing you and want to pervert the gospel of Christ. Now, this letter of Galatians, about 2,000 years old, give or take, and a few years. But let's talk about this for a second, okay? Paul's saying there's another. I feel like my whole life, until I started to really study the scriptures, understand what they were saying, I have lived in a world of another gospel. I used to speak at all these festivals and all this stuff, and you'd see the Christian culture and the Christian junk and all the stuff around it. And I've honestly rarely saw people practicing a type of pure Christianity of wanting to see others do well and loving others and caring about others, and folks not demanding their own way, not being critical and not being hateful. And so when I say a failed faith, I mean, I do believe that Christianity is probably in the thoughts of the majority of people a different gospel, and something's gotten lost. And I think it's obviously the influence of different religions, different thinkers over the 2,000 years and things like that. But the fact is it's like you can't even talk about the fundamentals of the faith, kind of the things that really make it stick out. I mean, Jesus's teachings that really stuck out was when it was like loving the stranger and loving the neighbor, not just the neighbor near to you, but the neighbor and your enemy. I mean, that was Jesus's thing, was like loving all people with the agape style love. And so that was really radical. And to see that so missed, and to see such a lack of compassion for other people because they don't think your way, or they don't vote your way, or they don't do these things, and somehow think that, so when that guy was like, I think you misspelled communism. I mean, I said, do you mean Christianity? Like this basic idea. So I'm going to lay this out really clear. I've done this probably before, but I'm going to continue to do it. Hopefully we'll get new people watching this. Hopefully you folks will share this and like and subscribe and help us get into the algorithm, because I think this message is desperately needed. And I don't want to just continue to repeat this to the same audience constantly, but I will do that as much as I have to in order to get that out there. And I think we can do that. I think we can get revolution out there a little bit more. I think we can get out on the algorithm. I think we can get people to see this because they need to see this. Because I'm shocked that there's neo-Calvinism is still like a thing, and there's still this like manliness for Jesus kind of thing, and it just totally just abolishes Jesus, and it totally doesn't understand like any of the complexities of the writings of Paul's and the forgeries and all these things. And so these people have just grasped onto some really horrible ideas and really horrible ways of treating their neighbors, their fellow believers. They've lacked compassion. I mean, you've got people getting book contracts who are writing books about how empathy is a sin. I mean, it's literally insane. My girlfriend says this is my favorite. My favorite thing to say is like from Zoolander. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills, but I really do start to feel like I'm taking crazy pills at this point, because I see these folks who are probably spending more time in church than I am, and they're in these communities, and I'm seeing the willingness to compromise, the willingness to just make a paycheck and have money and sit with people who, condone things that they don't believe in, and just continue to do that in order to have a certain type of lifestyle. And I also see people who just go to all this stuff and they don't know the very basics of the Christian teaching. and they weaponize the verses and they move goalposts and they use the verses only when it suits them. And so and the verse and chapter, and folks, these letters weren't written with verses and chapters originally. It wasn't meant to just be like, well, look at this look at this sentence and look at this paragraph, and it's like they'll talk about context, but then when they're taking it out of context, somehow that's okay. It's frustrating to see, and I'm just going to continue to do what I do and push this stuff, but hopefully we can get this out there. We can get people talking about this. Hopefully we can reform people. People can learn and get away from bad theology. And yeah, some of that bad theology is hundreds of years old. Some of it's over 1,000 years old, but it's still something that we adopted into the faith and is somewhat anti-Christ. Just war theory. All these really, we accepted these things and we changed the faith, and then it's like, oh well, no, but this, and then people using creeds to disagree. I'm like, well, that was like hundreds of years after the church. Anyway, I guess it's all how you visualize and accept, and what you accept Christianity to be and not, and what you think about binding and loosing and who you give authority to. But for me, I try to stick with like understanding the Bible within its context, within the reading the authors, the actual authors, not the some of like Corinthians and things where there are probably written by other people who were friends with the authors, but knowing where the forgeries, knowing the addition, knowing that, because what I found is that it makes me a more compassionate person, a more loving person, and helps me relate to my neighbors and even my enemies better. But when I start to see and Christians becoming indignant and angry because you would suggest of helping someone in their life if they're not aborted, and then them fighting for the death. It's like when you see this and you go, wow, they really don't understand the faith. They've just been told, this is a good cause. This is our cause. So this is a sacred cause. So we just stick with this sacred cause. Yet there is no logic to that cause, except who cares if they suffer? Who cares what happens to them? They just got to be born, and then they got to deal with it because we're not communists. So let's look at what Jesus had. Let's look at some things. But this kind of cruelty and demanding one's own way, this angry, getting anger because you've heard people want a quality of life is brought up. We've got to wake up. We need a wake-up call. This is why we need your support. This is why Revolution needs your help, because we need voices like mine and other voices that are saying this type of thing to be out there and combating against this type of false gospel, this false narrative of, it's only about the afterlife, or, it's only about these few things, and we're just all going to practice this type of love that is counterfeit. That's not love at all. And we don't care, and we're going to be cruel to, and when the argument doesn't work, we're just going to be cruel assholes for Jesus. I almost called this talk Assholes for Jesus, but I thought, I'll hold back a little bit. So yeah, I'm angry because I'm overwhelmed. It looks like, you have to have the faith to move a mountain. Remember, I don't think that was literally moving a mountain, but it's the faith of seeing something like this and having some faith or some sort of hope that this is possible to change. In Matthew 25, let's see what Jesus says in Matthew 25. And I'm not even go through the whole thing. I'm just going to read the basic first parts of it, and I'll fill it in. If you are not familiar with it, you can read the story. But it's the story of the least of these. And so this is what happens. For length's sake, I won't read the whole thing, but I'll try to give you some highlights for time's sake. They make the numbers so small in here, so small. I think it's 35. For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you gave me clothing. I was sick and you took care of me. I was in prison and you visited me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when was that we saw you hungry and gave you food, and thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you as a stranger and welcomed you, and naked and gave you clothes? And then when was it we saw you sick or in prison and visited you? And the king will answer, truly I tell you, just as you did to one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it to me. Now let's look at exactly what's covered here. It's not, you told me about the gospel and you told me the good news and you led me to Jesus. It's not what's being said here, folks. It's saying, you saw me hungry and made sure I had food. You saw me thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger. I was someone you did not know, and you welcomed me in and you showed me kindness. We're not even, I mean, God forbid we're kind to strangers. We're not even kind to Christians who think differently than us. We're horrible. We're horrible, horrible people sometimes. And people, oh, I'm not, I'm forgiven. I'm not perfect, but I'm forgiven. Like, well, yeah, you're far from perfect, and you don't seem to want to return the favor to anybody else. You gave me clothing when I was sick and took me in and cared for me. It's like the basic human needs. I was in prison. You visited me. You took care of me. When I was sick, you gave me medical attention. And you will see Christians constantly arguing against these types of things, even calling it communism. And literally, Jesus is saying this is the basic message, and that when how you treat others, how you treat people in need, who are hungry, and the poor, and those who are strangers, and those who are prisoners. I mean, this guy was arguing with me the death penalty over and over. Finally, I was just like, please stop. You're tearing my parents apart, and now you're telling me that you have to be pro-death penalty. And then he's like, I'm not a pro-lifer. I'm an abolitionist, an abortion abolishist. Then he had to change his words. I mean, these people can't have even decent conversations. They have to change the titles and what they call themselves, because they realize, yeah, I don't really give a damn about the people once they're alive. And matter of fact, even though we have an imperfect law system and justice system, I still think people should be put to death. Maybe an innocent person dies or not, but I still believe it. And that is the opposite of the teachings of Christ. It's the opposite of the Christian faith and following Jesus. Jesus changed a lot of things, and this is like, now Jesus, and the basics are how you love God is how you love the least of these. And you see people being horrified that they're not pro-life enough if they don't care to help others. Do you understand? That is not Christianity. They have fallen for another faith, another religion that calls itself Christianity, but is a false gospel. So they are following a false gospel. I'm not saying they're unsaved, but I'm saying they're not following Jesus. They're not following the religion of Christianity. They're following something that has grown out of something else that's not, it's not even the basics. It's like the fundamentalists don't even know the very fundamentals of the faith. And this faith is take care of the least of these. Love your enemies. Help people. Care for others. And they don't do it. And they're so full of hostility and anger, we need to ask, why are they so angry? Because as that anger that's releasing through these conversations, showing that they're dealing with lots of pain, they're dealing with lots of rejection, they're dealing with impossible standards, and that maybe even instinctively they know they're wrong, especially when they have to continue to move the goalposts, continue to try to move things around. And is their faith so weak and their God is so small that it can only operate within a small place? The idea is when the temple, the temple curtain didn't probably literally rip when Jesus was crucified. I don't thinking that literally happened. But the point is that we were no longer separated from God. And what we've done is we've created all these sacred spaces in these churches. I mean, I remember going to churches and people being like, or they would, take off your shoes. You're standing on holy ground. We've got to bring in the Spirit. And it's like, no, God is everywhere. You're not ushering God in. You might be singing, but you're not bringing. That's just not. It's not happening. This isn't a particular special place just because we're here. It's special because we're gathered together, but it's not. Anyhow, it drives me crazy. And so, yeah, I'm very frustrated, but I'm trying to stay positive. I'm trying to stay in a way where, like, we can fix this, we can change this, we can use kindness, we can disagree well, we can use nonviolence, and we can let people see the errors of their ways. And you know what? People probably will be mad and angry at first when you realize you're wrong, but maybe we can get to the point where we are a little more patient. We use the fruits of the Spirit and allow them to sit with it and think it over and re-examine, because you're not going to re-examine necessarily right away. Sometimes it really stings and hurts, and you just want to defend yourself because you're hurt or you're mad or you feel insecure. Like, I understand those things, but the fact is we still have to have these conversations. We still, like, this one was like, I don't understand why you're so pissy, blah, blah. And I'm going, I'm pissy because you're like fighting against the literally basic message that Jesus taught about people's stuff, just so you can defend, a movement that Christianity has linked onto. You're literally just throwing out the worthiness of people to say you're pro-life, and you don't, but you don't care about people's lives after they're born. You don't care about childcare. You don't care about people being able to go to the doctor. You don't care about taking care of the stranger or visiting the prisoner. I mean, the one guy would keep arguing with me, wanted to see the prisoners fry. I see Christians say, oh, we need to take away this from the prisoners and this from, and Jesus is like, no, you care for these people. You love these people. That's what's different. You don't just love people who love you. You don't just do things for people who can do things for you. Yet, I would say Christians are much worse than this than people outside of Christianity. I don't know what it is, but it seems like people outside of the church are much better at following Christ and showing Christ than any group of people in religion. They're better at loving each other, I feel much more loved at my job after school than I probably have at any other church, right? Because there's just all this baggage and this bullshit. It's almost like maybe the church just needs to stop for a few years. It's like, let's all just stop. Let's just stop meeting, close the buildings down for a little while, turn them into homeless shelters or daycares or something like that. And let's just let this stuff lie. We need to restart. We need to reboot. We need to turn it off and then maybe turn it back on. You're not going to probably hear this in a lot of churches today. Are there churches out there that I think are doing great work? Yes, there are. And if you follow me on social media, you'll see me retweet just a few people, but I think these few people are doing really great work. But there's a lot of it that just seems like we've given into the worst parts of our natures and our insecurities and our selfishness and our anger. And somehow, rather than Christianity giving us grace and forgiveness and love and compassion, it's given us this right to just be arrogant and rude and demanding our own way. Literally, it seems like the exact opposite of the teachings of Christ, the exact opposites of the teachings of the Apostle Paul, even the opposite of James, even you could say even the opposite of the book of John and Peter and First John. It's just, I don't see it, and I have to say it. I grew up being like, people need to get right with Jesus, and they need to stop sinning and stop going to rock and roll movies. And these guys would be really passionate about that. And people are like, well, I'm here to say we got to stop being horrible human beings. We've got to start caring about other people and thinking about others and being more patient with others and being more kind with one another. And also learning to do that with ourselves as well. That's one of the things I had to learn through all this, was not just giving grace and forgiveness and loving others, but I also had to learn to love myself and accept myself. And it took a lot of time. It doesn't happen overnight, but we are in a time period where we see this, and we see Christians like worshiping our politicians and, saying insane stuff and doing these things that are so anti-Christ. I just, I care about this faith enough to at least try to defend it, at least try to help it out a little bit while I have this short time here on earth. So here Jesus gives this whole point, and it says, like, this is how you treat these people is how you treated God. This is the real worship, not just singing at your church and giving your tithes and going to Bible study, but really, if you want to worship God, treat God well. There's this U2 song that came out recently, and it goes, I will, and one of the parts of the song goes, I will bless the Lord always. And so I wrote that up. I said, oh, that's pretty interesting. I put the song up on my Facebook, and someone was like, how do you bless the Lord? And I was like, well, I don't know, ask you to. But honestly, this is how you do it. You visit the prisoners. You help people get clothes and help people get meals, and people who are hungry get fed, and it's you maybe vote that particular way to see where that will help people. You think, at least do the least that you can do. Is this serving others? All right. So what does think about the story. Let's do another Jesus thing. Think of the story of the Good Samaritan. Okay, when the religious leader or the lawyer says, "Okay, Jesus, who is my neighbor?" When he says, hoping that he'll be like, "Oh, it's just your fellow Jews," or just your, and Jesus uses a Samaritan, and then we get the story of the Samaritan. What does the Samaritan do? What does he say? So the Samaritan loves somebody who is hostile to them just by faith, religion, and culture, sees someone who would necessarily be their enemy and helps them because they see them in need, and is worried what's going to happen to them. What does he do? He he gets with their wounds. He makes sure they get the medical attention they need, make sure they get shelter that they need, then gives finances to the innkeeper so they I'm sure that the person has the food that they need, more health care that they need, and are able to get better. And then he goes, hey, and if there's any other expenses, I've got it covered. My money. I'm going to take care of it. I don't know this person from Adam, but they needed help. They needed basic human dignity. And I'm giving it to them, even though they probably would not want to, they would probably cross the street if they saw me. But this is what I'm going to do. And Jesus again is saying, so who's the neighbor here? Who's acting like the real neighbor? The Samaritan. There's a reason they call it the Good Samaritan. There's a reason there's called the Samaritan hospitals and all these things, and why the Samaritan's purse and that name and all these stuff, because that is Jesus saying this is the essence of gospel. So Jesus saying how you treat these people is how you treat God. The story of how is my neighbor? Your neighbor is your enemy, and you also want to make sure that they get fed, that they get medical attention, and they get these things. It is the basic message of Christ. And here I'm seeing Christians get their underwear in a bond because they're angry, because they go, oh, that sounds like communism to me. It's like, okay, well, first of all, you're worshiping politics, you have fear, and you're rejecting Christ because you have a head full of propaganda. And the church has been a victim of propaganda for over 300 years. I mean, in the first 300 years, I mean, it's for over 2,000 years almost. I mean, I'm sure right away. But the church's propaganda comes in and confuses the people in power. They want to use it to manipulate us or to keep us divided and things like that. And so propaganda comes into it. And what I realize is a lot of the times these arguments I'm having with people is it's based like on what pastors who've told them to justify their own political desires and their own desires to have power and their own things. And so they're just sharing this like toxic, false message of the gospel to justify where they're at. And now these people have taken that misinformation and become victims, a lot of them, of this misinformation, and can't understand the very basic context of the faith that they've said they've dedicated their whole life to. And they're so blind to it that they read these scriptures and they go right past them and they only see the ones that support their belief system rather than the ones that challenge it. So, yeah, he bandages his wounds, gets him a place to stay, make sure his basic needs are met. I mean, do you hear this, folks? Do we hear what's being said? I've heard scholars argue that Jesus' message wasn't get saved, but it was to love other people. That really Paul's the one who comes in and says, well, we've got to give our life to Jesus, follow Jesus, do this. But Jesus is saying, follow me, but follow me by helping the least of these, by helping the poor, by giving everything you have to the poor, by doing these things. Yet, any suggestion of that, or any suggestion of saying, okay, well, this is wild, because if you think about, the extra mile, Pete Rollins used to tell a story of like the church of the extra mile. And then one day Jesus comes and goes, okay, now you got to walk another mile. Then there's the church of the extra mile, and then I'm going to walk another mile. And I think that's fun. Interesting. But it's like these folks are like, well, I've been fighting abortion. Why would I help kids get food? Their parents should get a job and do all this stuff. And like, they act like the reality of the world isn't hard. I mean, I was like, listen, folks, I worked 3 jobs. I had a little bit of savings saved up. You know how I had to pay my rent this month? I had to use up my savings to pay my rent. I didn't have enough money. I didn't make enough money doing Revolution. I didn't make money in my after school job, and I didn't make enough money doing my yard stuff and my all that. So I don't have any savings because I had to dip into it. I don't have any room left on my credit cards because I have kids and I have to get gas, and gas is ridiculously expensive here. I have to buy groceries. Groceries are almost twice as much right now than they were, a year ago. Maybe not twice as much, but enough to make such a difference that I was already barely getting by, that I'm not getting by. You guys are obviously going through that. So giving and down, donations are down, and we're all struggling. And these folks sit there and act like, well, if these people aren't making enough money, even though we know the reality of the minimum wage in this world, how hard it is to get a job at this time, how broke people are, yet we sit here and, mock people and say, pretty much make it clear that we don't give a damn and that they should pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. Yet Jesus says that we are to help one another, support one another, care for one another, and help provide these things for one another. You have to excuse me. My other guest, speaking of work, my boss just texted me and wants to call me, and I need to tell him I'm in the middle of a talk. So here we go. I can't right now. I'm in the middle of a talk. Boom, there you go. Trying to get extra hours. So, folks, how have we become so blind? How have we become so insensitive? How have we become so cruel? How have we become so such capitalists that we've just been like, sorry, Jesus, we're capitalists, so you're like, socialists. Bullshit. We don't want any of that. Matter of fact, it sounds like communism, Jesus. You need to get out of here. You didn't really say that, Jesus. Jesus like, no, I remember that part. Oh no, but you didn't really mean it. Hey, we're keeping those kids alive. Yeah, but those kids will be hungry and poor, and what will they get out of their lives? And then they end up on death row, and you support that. So what's the point? Oh, just getting to heaven. So basically, the whole thing is you guys just want to have a eternal insurance. No, with concepts of hell being misunderstood, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago, and the idea of an afterlife and this like mansions and gold streets and stuff have just turned people into just really awful human beings, and has turned this faith into just a way of really lots of bad people, a lot of really mean, angry, cruel people who have found a way to justify it, found a way not to care really that deeply about others, even if they don't realize it. They've grown into something that is really just become almost it's a worthless faith, a faith that doesn't reproduce, a faith that has no fruits. Um, and it's just full of angry. And then they go, well, why are you so mad at me for saying this? I'm like, because I'm frustrated, man. I'm frustrated that you're like sitting here telling me you have a theological degree and you don't know basic biblical history, that this isn't being taught, and that you're teaching like an antichrist message, and you're dying and you're fighting for some like poor people on death row to freaking die, because God forbid they get 3 meals a day and they spend the rest of their life there, and I mean, I don't know. You can see I'm frustrated, but I'm trying not to let anger overtake me, but I am passionate about us making a change. I'm passionate about us speaking out and speaking truth to power and speaking truth to the ignorant and having tough conversations and being willing to have them be like, you're an asshole, and get mad and be like, okay, get mad at me, but just think about it. Just go away and think on this. What can we do? So that's the thing, is I've really gotten to the point where I feel like I just have to speak truth to these folks, and say, well, this is, you might think I'm a heretic, but here you go. This is I don't recognize as what you're doing is, it almost seems the opposite of Christianity. Um Zoe's here. Zoe loves James. We're going to look at James because James does the same thing. Like I said, these are the usual, a lot of these verses I use all the time to remind us of these very same things. But the fact is that I feel like it's only getting to us who know this stuff. So one, you can't hear this enough and be reminded enough, because hopefully you'll come up in your own conversations, in your own life, in your own community, in your own situations as well. But hopefully through you liking this kind of stuff, sharing this kind of stuff, and supporting this word, we will get this message out there, and that we will start to push back and challenge those who are preaching a gospel that is devastating, that is hurting others, that's isolating people and making people feel less than, and that honestly is just quite dangerous and completely anti-Christ. When I talk about a reformation, that's why we need a reformation in the church. That's why we need the church to change, is because it's become a horrific place for a lot of people. And it's become to the point now where it supports things that are so anti the gospel, so anti loving others and loving enemies, and do these things. Like I said before, I think people outside of the church are better than this. And I almost would say it's probably better to be outside of the church than to be in a church at this point in our history. And there's some good ones, but I don't see a lot of great stuff out there inspiring me online. I see a few things and I try to share those with people, but problem is sometimes some of the people overcorrect. Some of my progressive brothers and sisters kind of overcorrect, and then they become very angry and hateful and things, and it becomes another club of thinkers and people who go, well, we're the in and you're the out. And you're the other. But they're not treating the other as like taking care of the other. They're treating the other with hostility. So, I mean, and I do it too. I mean, I understand it, but in my teaching, I want to figure out how a way that we build bridges, that we do things, we help people learn, we help educate people, and we help free them of this information, just like in nonviolence and in the work of Dr. King and the civil rights movement, that we kind of do that. It was very successful within Northern Ireland. People came together and compromised. I mean, there's still people who argue it and are just upset about it, but they're able to coexist. At this point, we don't even can exist. Not that we're having very many examples. I mean, if you look at the right and the left in this country and the politicians in this country, they don't seem to care about serving the people. They just seem to care about fighting one another constantly. And it's kind of a nightmare to live in. Also, given this current administration, having a leader who's pretty much, I don't know if he's a narcissist. I'm not a psychiatrist, but who is inept, want to be dictator, um, who seems to care very little about the people, the average Americans and the average people in this country. And we're all desperately suffering. And this idea that we're all so exhausted and so tired because we're struggling so hard, we're emptying out our savings accounts, struggling to, it's hard to do anything. This is how this stuff happens. We're all so exhausted. It's like when I was talking to Jason, who's from England, from the UK, I said things are pretty awful, and he's like, "Yeah," he's like, "It's weird. Like it seems pretty awful, but he's like, you all seem pretty calm. It seems like everybody's just kind of dealing with it. I mean, like the president just sued the country, just sued the United States, the IRS, and is taking tax money to cover for his people, like billions of dollars. I mean, it's insane. I mean, it's insane to see what's happening in the United States and to our country. And that's not a right or left thing. It's just this guy's bad. I mean, when I told you the things I didn't like Joe Biden, and I didn't like his support of Israel and the war and all those things, I made it clear. And a lot of you got mad at me and left, and that's okay. But I'm going to say the same thing. Trump is not a good human being. He is a man who seems to be obsessed with himself and other billionaires, and we're all suffering horrifically because of it. And we need to be able to speak out about it. We need to be able to talk about it, and we need to be pushed back about it. But I get it. We're all really exhausted. It's really tough to do. It's hard to get organized when you like barely can pay your rent. And you can barely do these things. And so you're spending all your time doing these other things just to stay alive. And then when it comes time to say something or do something, you're exhausted. You're laying in bed. This is the story we find ourselves in. And so we have to continue to encourage each other to be clear and to be honest and to speak out in truth and love and hope that we can make things better. And I think also allowing ourselves to be shocked, allowing ourselves to be angry, allowing to share that with other people and say, this is ridiculous. This is horrific. But it seems like we're all just so beat that we're just like, oh, yeah, that's what he does. How many of us are going to be on the streets? And then you got Christians who are like, well, you should have pulled yourself up by your bootstraps. God wasn't blessing your ministry. So it's just the perfect storm for a shit show. And for us to just become really selfish people, selfish human beings, incapable of showing decent compassion or humanity or love. And that's for me, it's like, I'm exhausted, man. I'm tired. I did everything I could to try to work out my different jobs and everything to get my bill paid this month, to do all this stuff, and yet couldn't do it. So I had to pull out the emergency fund. There it goes. It's gone, and it's because I take my kids to games. I take my kids to their sporting events. I take it's like almost $7 a gallon of gas in some places, $6.25, $6, I get half the groceries for the same price I got all the groceries for last time, and now I'm like picking what I get. And okay, well, what can I live on food wise when my kids aren't here? This is what Americans are going through. It's not just them. It's so many of us. And I hear it with people I work with. I hear it with people online. I hear it with people even outside of this country, that we're all struggling because this like late stage capitalism, they're just, the only thing they want us for is to consume. I mean, I guess if we become poor enough, we won't be able to purchase their products or use our devices to argue with each other. Then they might have to, give us a few more coins to to at least have that bare minimum. But we're in a scary place, folks. And something radical has to happen. And I don't want it to be violence. I don't want it to be anger, and I don't want it to be hate. But I definitely can understand that as a reaction. Like for me, nonviolence is something that I have to work on. It's like being sober. It's progress, not perfection. It's something I have to practice because I understand the anger. I understand the want to rage. I understand the want to do things. I understand losing my patience. I understand the fruits of the spirit starting to fade a bit when you're in these situations. I mean, it's hard to be a good parent. It's hard to be a good worker when you're just constantly just going like trying to make your ends meet. James, the book of James. So let's look at what James says. You know, old Luther didn't like James. Funny thing is over time, I used to be a huge fan of Luther. I still like some of what Martin Luther said on grace, but over time, I've started to switch. My Luther's kind of faded a little bit, especially after I studied him in the seminary that I spent some time in. And James is starting to. Oh, I see James in a completely different way. And I think maybe that's kind of the issue is that, the epistle of straw. But when you look, and Zoe knows what I'm talking about, but when you look at what James tells us, I think the book of James may be, for me, I've always thought Galatians is the book for now, and I still do, but maybe the book of James is the book for right now, especially if you look at with how our politicians are acting and what they're doing and who gets favor and who doesn't get favor, and the church as well, and how the things that they wink at and they let get by and what they see. The book of James is very relevant at this point in time in history for us to look at and think about and go, how do this, if you talk about applying scripture and using scripture, well, where is it in the verse? These people, where's the verse? Finally, one person I was like, okay, book of James 2. Go look at what that says. I have to it's maddening. So in the book of James, in James 2, so crazy that this book of James used to drive me crazy when I first understood grace. And now I look at it and go, oh, this is what grace becomes. This is the supernatural part of grace. This is where grace, when we really accept ourselves and accept grace and learn to love ourselves. Oh, this is why grace is transformative. This is why grace is also a sign of anarchy. And I want to read one part in 2 that I didn't think I was going to read, but there's one part in 2 before the main part I'm looking at. But in 2:7, it says, but you have dishonored the poor person. Is it not the rich who oppress you? Is it not those who drag you into the courts? Is it not those who blaspheme the excellent name that was invoked over you? I mean, it's clearly saying the rich these are the folks that take you to court. These are the folks who take your money. These are the folks that hurt you. These are the folks who can't understand Christ because they're so focused on their bottom line. Why do you resent the poor? I mean, so it's not like this is a new idea. This is a 2,000-year-old, this has been a human nature, a human problem for a very long time. Of course, the famous one I'm talking about is the faith without works, which I've read here a few times. What good is it if my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but does not have works? I used to think that this was just like him trying to own Paul, but now I see it completely different. There's the fact that maybe he wasn't even familiar with Paul's work, but this is probably not actually James. So this guy probably was, whoever wrote this probably did know who Paul was, but let's listen to this anyway. Surely that faith cannot save, can it? Question mark. If a brother or sister is naked and lacks daily food, did you hear that? Lacks daily food, not just, oh, I got him a meal. And one says to them, go in peace, keep warm and eat your fill, and yet you do not supply their body's needs. What is the good of that? So faith by itself, it has no works, is dead. Literally, Jesus says that if you feed people, you clothe people, you help take care of people, care about them, or maybe you vote so your government will help those folks at least, and you don't mind your taxes going towards that, you're doing that for God. We see it in the Samaritan, you're being the neighbor. And then James says clearly, like, if you're skipping this stuff, if you're seeing hungry people and saying, good luck, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, he's saying your faith's dead. I'm not going to say if that's about heaven and hell. I don't think it is, but your faith is worthless. It is dead. If you see hungry people and you have the means to help them. I mean, right now I don't have the means to barely help myself and my own family. But what if you have these means, and even if you don't, you can break some of the bread, give out some of what you got, care that, do that type of thing. Um, so again, we look at James and we see, you know, helping someone have the clothing that they need, making sure they have a warm bed, making sure they have daily food, you know. Otherwise, it's a dead faith, you know. And so for me, when it's like pro life without love of the person's life and caring for those who are alive is not pro life at all. It's just death, really. It's just death and more suffering. You could say the same thing there. I mean, literally, if you ask people who are outside of the church, if you ask people what the legacy of Christ was in Christianity, non-Christian scholars and things like that, and what did Jesus really do? And a lot of them will tell you that the legacy of that faith of Christianity, what makes it interesting and separate from other faiths at the time, was the loving of your enemies and the neighbors and the strangers. That it was moving outside of your own communities, and the idea of agape love for all. That was the big legacy of the life of Christ. Even for those scholars and educators outside of, they will say that was a big part. That was a big impact of Christianity. Yet that very big impact, we push back. We call it communism or liberalism or thisisms, and we go, oh no, no, no. You know, and we become greedy, and we become loyal to these leaders and these politicians, and we become misguided and misinformed, and you know that's where we're at. We're in a world where Christianity is unrecognizable if you understand it at a basic level, and if you take off your glasses of tradition and years of legalism and all this stuff, and you really get down to the essence of it, you realize that it's not even being practiced by most people in this country. um Talk about the Apostle Paul again. Why does the Apostle Paul say, like, because people like legalistic people love to use the Apostle Paul, or you like to use Apostle Paul as an excuse not to help people in need, and it's just rubbish. If you really understand Paul and you read these books and you read what he's saying to these folks, he's never saying that, oh, he just wants you to be saved. He doesn't care about your stomach. Why does the Apostle Paul then say that the only thing that matters, this is literally the Apostle Paul says this, the only thing that matters is faith expressing itself through love? And Paul makes pretty clear what he believes love is, almost to the complete definition of agape. So the only thing that matters is faith expressing itself through love. Not that you're going to get to heaven, not that you're going to, live forever, not that you might go to hell. The Apostle Paul never even mentions hell. As far as Paul doesn't seem to even know that there's such a place. But he does say the only thing that matters is faith expressing itself through love. So obviously Paul got that message from Jesus of the least of these, and how you treat the least of these and how you treat these people who are in need was thing. Obviously he understood the words of James saying, if you see someone hungry and you see someone naked and lonely and tired and you just say, good luck, see you later, your faith is worthless, because its faith is not expressing itself through love. And he went as far as say that's the only thing that matters. So where are my literalists on with that? Right? So that's it. Part two, though, is what I wanted to just go over real quickly. As I told you, I was doing a little bit of a part two here, is that it's not just a failed faith. I feel right now I live in a failed America. The partisan fighting of each other, as these folks are doing with each other, is pretty bad. Words like liberal and conservative have become insults. So this is how divided we are, that we see someone else and we use their term as an insult. It's a total mess. It's hard to tell who actually cares anymore. There's so much money in politics, in trading, in inside trading, and donors and things like that. It just doesn't. It's impossible to think that. Like, how do we know that any of these people will really care about the well-being of one another? And we're just seeing it slowly. Certain things that were. I mean, America's never been perfect. It's always been a very complicated place. It's always been a very hard place. It's always been very misguided when it comes to our, uh, uh, the least of these, when it has come to people of color, when it's come to people of different sexualities. America has not always been on that right side of history, but there's always been people calling for that. And now it's a mess. I mean, it's this current administration is horrific and chaotic. It's become authoritarian with groups like ICE. Uh, Medical care is getting cut. Services that help people here in this country and across the world have been cut. USAID. Um, And so here if we have believers and followers who think the things that James and Jesus said about the least of these is bullshit, and that Paul said about faith expressing itself through love, and we have these type of politicians, no wonder we're in the place that we're in right now. And misinformation rules the day. Another gospel has got us into the place that we're at, and people are suffering. We're all suffering. We're all struggling. I mean, I literally have worked on my car 3 times and replaced parts that I'd never worked on a car in my life before. The other day, somebody cut by and was like, "Oh, have you always been good at fixing things?" I'm like, "Nope." But it's amazing what wanting to be able to be a good dad and take your kids to their practices and schools and have some fun with them will do for you to make things work and figure things out. And so, yeah, it's a tough time, and that's where we're at. And it just feels like we are around a lot of oppression, a lot of failure, a lot of questions. And I hope we will all think of creative ways, agape ways, graceful ways to get ourselves out of this situation and to make a change and to make a difference and be radical and use nonviolence to fight against the oppression and really a corrupt government at this point, a corrupt. I will speak truth about that. It's not about right or left, folks. It's about people. And I don't know how we miss it. I don't know how we become so uh, become such victims of this type of misinformation. But we are. And so hopefully people listen to our voices. So if you folks can continue to like and subscribe to this kind of stuff, encourage people to listen to it. Let's get this stuff out there. At least let's get a more of a conversation happening. Because I'm sure we're all very tired and doing our best to get by. So anyway, I've got to go call my my other boss to see if I can do some landscaping work right now, and see what we can. And man, I haven't even paid my rent yet. I had to take all the stuff out of my savings and had to move it into another account, and it hasn't puts that account. And Monday's a holiday, and I'm just like, and I got a letter today telling me that my insurance was going to be canceled if I didn't turn in proof of income within the next. I missed the date they gave me. I didn't realize I'd missed the date, and so I have to get it in by holiday. So now I have to try to get it on Tuesday. So hopefully I don't lose my insurance. You know, and I'm not saying that so you can go, "Oh, poor Jay." What I'm doing is I'm saying that we're all in the same boat right now, folks. We're all really going through a rough time right now. So this faith expressing itself through love, this being the Good Samaritan, seeing how we treat the least of these is vitally important. And I think seeing these things is a way that's going to help us get onto the right track. Being selfish and being only concerned with our own issues and our own problems and our own wants and our own desires has got us into this place. Bad theology, selfish theology, theology that seeks power and domination have got us into this mess. So we got to reshift it. And I think faith expressing itself through love, which is really nonviolence as well, it will help us shift into the right place. But we've got to be loud, we've got to be clear, and we've got to be willing to argue well and be repetitive and continued. I'm always been repetitive, so I'm a good example. But be repetitive with the message, be continuous with the message, and not give up and not lose faith. And also maybe be there for one another while we go through this stuff. Be willing to listen to one another and check in on one another and encourage one another, because man, it is a freaking tough time in the world. All right, folks, I love you so much. Listen, if you are one of the folks out there who aren't really struggling and are going, oh, I've got all this money and I don't know what to do with it, Revolution Church could use your support. You can go to revolutionchurch.com, make a tax deductible donation. We are about to do a fundraiser, but we could use your help just because we're trying to provide some things for people who give. I've got 10 Grace's Anarchy hats. We were going to get 16, but we couldn't afford 16, so I got 10. So that's going to be part of the fundraiser. I'm going to be having some of my books that I will have as gifts, and we have buttons. Some people have donated buttons, some people have given pins, and so we're going to try to do this little fundraiser. I'm going to do some of my books, my hardcovers that I have. I'm going to do a few art pieces on my hardcovers of my books to make those available and that type of thing. So anyway, folks, stay strong, stay consistent. Do not remain silent. Right now is not the time for silence. There's so many people out there, and maybe I didn't touch on your most passionate project, but keep standing up for the least of these and for one another, and keep speaking truth to those folks, and let's let them know, hey, I think you might be misinformed, and I think you may have lost the story here, and how can I help you get back to that? All right, thank you so much, everybody. Love you guys. I'll be here next week. revolutionchurch.com, and see you later.